Let's go ahead and get started, please. Had a good tech ed so far? Awesome. Some great speakers, some great content, a few surprises, some good announcements. One of the surprises was me getting sick this week. Sorry about that. Nothing contagious, just a little bit of laryngitis. Monday I had 0 volume, so sound guy in the back would have been having a nightmare with me. As it was Tuesday, I had to use the little Madonna mic kind of over the ear and really amp it up so I could be heard and understand. Uh-oh, now you're messing with me. So there's antibiotics, there's this great Chertussin, the good stuff with codeine in it. Yeah. Cold mist humidifier in the hotel room. I'm going to donate to the hotel when I'm done. Long story short, I get to do my talk and I get a voice, so thanks for bearing with me on that. So am I the last slot of the day and then it's party time and home flight and no pressure then, right? Let's get started then. So hello, I'm Rich Hundhausen. I'm from Boise, Idaho, and I've been doing a lot of talks this week on developer practices. I'm a big Scrum guy. I do a lot of Visual Studio ALM, so I like the fusion of those two ideas. How can agile development practices and Scrum specifically come together with Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server and the tooling in there for doing unit tests and taking a good approach to building software to eliminate waste and really deliver business value. So you kind of get the tip of my spear in this talk. I'm going to not hold any punches. I'm going to just tell it like it is. Some of the stuff you're going to hear is a little edgy. I'm hoping it'll get across to you that what I'm talking about can be done, but it's not easy. So if you want to email me, you can send me an email at richard@exsentient.com. If you want to publicly humiliate me on Twitter, go for it. I love it. There's no such thing as bad publicity on Twitter, right? I mean, Charlie Sheen started ranting out loud on Twitter, and now he's got 4 million followers or something, so must be working. Anybody recognize this house? It is not mine. It's in Silicon Valley, California. Winchester Mansion. So the story goes in a nutshell that the guy that invented the Winchester rifle, he died early on, and his wife, kind of went insane or something and had a seance seer, fortune teller tell her that she had to keep building the house, always build the house, make new rooms for the ghosts of the spirits that were killed by, your husband's invention. And you end up with a really interesting architecture inside, stairs to nowhere and, hidden panels and things like that. So I thought this would be a good kickoff for my topic of emergent architecture. That sometimes not having a plan can actually yield something fairly nice looking, but maybe not so functional. Or maybe it is functional, given that the spirits have a place to go and hang their hats. I don't know. So I'm not going to bore you with the Agile Manifesto. You guys have been hearing it for 10 years. In fact, I think exactly 10 years this spring. I'm just going to focus on one part of it. What we care about in this industry is working software over documentation. Comprehensive documentation. Documentation so high, you need to have a table of contents to the table of contents. Anybody remember a product from IBM called Lotus Agenda? It was like way before Notes and way before, I think, Windows. Page 1 of the manual was how to put the manual together. I love it. If I had Twitter back then, I'd be telling people about that. So some people take documentation to a whole new level. And when I say documentation, I'm not talking about F1 and the CHM file that comes up, or what you see when you crack open the little book that comes with the product. I'm talking about the documentation that the team uses to collaborate with each other, or that the business uses to collaborate with the team. So I think you know where I'm going to go on this one in the whole Agile talk. I'm not going to surprise you on that one. Let's talk about the wisdom of building roads and bridges. A lot of people want to equate, basic construction of bridges, buildings, dams, things that are predictable, things that can be planned, things that Microsoft Project, thrives on, with that of building software. And as we know in this industry, it doesn't really work the same. The types of risks are different. The type of planning is different. The type of estimates are different. One of the good analogies I heard was crossword puzzles. Hey, I did the New York Times crossword last week in 45 minutes. So that means I'm going to do this week's in 45 minutes? No, because it's a different swamp this week. It's a different puzzle. It could be an increment up or down from 45 minutes, but I can't be that predictable to know how long it's going to take me to do something complex. And when we build software, more is unknown than is known. So we need a better way to do it. So you hear about this value up. Let's start with an increment and give you some value, and then continue to give you value until the product owner or the company, the customer, sees that that's enough. And oftentimes you'll be surprised. You might end up being done sooner than you expected. One of my colleagues just did a talk in the Middle East on agile estimation, and it was great. He said, well, we're going to estimate how long it's going to take to drive from, Abu Dhabi or whatever to his home in Spain. And, the ultimate goal was not driving there, it was to get there. And when he got there, he realized, hey, there's a flight there, I'm done. So, weeks of travel not necessary, I could just pick up a flight and go. So oftentimes, let's focus on up front the what and less on the how, and let the team focus on the how. You're going to hear me say that a few times this talk. So big design up front is waste. It works for bridges, pretty blueprints, and everyone can point to the part that they're building, and, well, this isn't done yet, so we can't start this, and this needs a 3/8" wrench to put it together. Yeah, people doing that level of construction need those kind of blueprints and that kind of documentation. But software doesn't. Software, at a very minimum, just needs to have an idea what needs to be built so that it can be prioritized, and then let the team figure out the how. I'll get into that a little deeper here. So why does it seem good? Gosh, it seems good. Well, requirements are better understood, right? If we spend the time to do this documentation and wireframes, and we bring in the UML, and we fire up Visio, PowerPoint, and Balsamic all together, we should get something that means sense. We can understand the problem there. Thinking things out ahead of time saves headaches, right? Works for NASA. Changes to specs are cheaper than changes to code. Hey, we can fix bugs once, we identify them in the specifications. We haven't even written any code yet. Got to be cheaper to fix them then, right? And basically the same thing. But why isn't it not good? Well, guess what? You don't understand the requirements in the first place, no matter how much time you spend on them. Not to mention they change. That's the big one right there. You spend X days, weeks, months, you put in the metric there, understanding the requirements, they're going to change. How many of you would agree with me that users can't tell you what they want, only what they don't want when they see it? Yep, that's that one. And as good as we are coming to tech ed, spending 24 hours a day learning, Visual Studio is always up in our brain. We got the keypad, the F1 keys, everything's just memorized. We're not able to foresee all the problems. Some of the problems come back with usability. We'll give you an increment of it, you play with it. Oh, so your requirements were off, and we understand that. Now that you've seen it and played with it, you know what we're talking about, what a GUID is. You don't want to see a GUID printed on the guy's wristband. You want to see some kind of abstraction there. Well, now that you see what a GUID is in practice, now you might want to change your requirement for our next feature set. So you might need some implementation. Now some of you would say, well, that's prototyping, or that's rapid application development. Let's just get something out and let them see it and play with it. Fine, but if it's not usable, if it's not an increment that's usable, you're not going to see all the features there that may or may not need to be changed in the future. So some implementation is going to be required. And there we go, I just nailed that one. Only what they don't want after they see it. Okay, now the big thing. I'm not a big fan of design up front because there's no business value in design. Okay, one thing we have to look at as an industry here, as software development professionals, wherever we are in the team, is what is our job? What is our role? It's to deliver business value in the form of working software. It's not to write code, it's not to write tests, it's not to pass tests. Those are all the tasks that roll up into working software that rolls up into business value. So one thing I'm a big fan of is in Scrum or any Agile method that you're using is having the product owner or the customer establish the business value of something. This is hard to do. Finding a product owner that cares what the business value is of a feature to show a Twitter feed on the home page. Well, I don't know. I don't know what the business value of that is. Well, great, let's not build it. Well, no, we need it. Okay, give me a number, 1 to 100, just put a number in there, something to quantify that so that we can maybe start to rank it against other things. Because at the end of the day, the big metric that should really matter to companies is how much business value are we giving you per dollar? Now, whether that's an arbitrary number, more money being made, being saved, new customers, less surprises, whatever your metric is, That's the ultimate measure of are we doing good as a software development team, is business value per dollar. Everything else is just noise. So where are you today? Let's take the extreme left-hand side, waterfall, where you go off in a cave and you write this documentation with the experts, throw it over the wall, someone builds it, maybe someone tests it, users get it. Or we come off of that a little bit. We're just big design up front. Not so much waterfall with all the attorneys and signatures and milestones and the bonds and the what happens if we don't get done on time. Kind of scary situation there. We're just doing big design up front. You know it when you see it. Gosh, it feels like we're doing a lot of design. Why don't we just get in there and start doing something and let the code kind of become the design? Well, that's not what I'm saying here either, and I'll get to that. Some design. Let's take a sprint and just do some design. Okay, let's just take a month and look at Entity Framework and look at the various ORM tools out there. Look at MVP, look at MVVM, look at something that some guy in whatever lower upper Slobovia built that might be cool. Well, all right. So you do some design up front. Or Emergent. And notice Emergent is not on the extreme right. I reserve that for cowboys, which is not this talk either. So I want you getting into code. I want you getting into creating increments of business value sooner rather than later, but doing it in a way where you're not going to paint yourself into a corner by making some bad decisions. So let's talk about emergent architecture. It's the opposite of BDUF. It's where you allow the architecture to emerge or develop as you develop. In fact, in Scrum, there is no such thing as an architect, a tester, a programmer, database engineer, build master. It's all just developer. Developer is the new term for drone. Shave your heads, burn your business cards, you're just a developer. Architects develop design, developers, programmers develop code, testers develop test cases, test steps, all of that. I like that. That way we're not really pent up on you're the architect. No, you're a developer that may help with the architectural tasks, the development of the architecture. So some decisions will need to be made early. I'm not saying you can just go and cowboy it and change your mind as you need to. The technologies you use, these should be influenced by the organization, by the product. You may work at a company that says, we're C# or we're Java. The product we're building has to be 64-bit, so there's some more limitations. We can't use certain libraries and certain approaches that are 32-bit only. Patterns, practices. What I don't like is the architect on the team is the person that makes the decision for all of this. Well, I've been coding since man was not on the moon yet, and my monolithic approach to coding is the pattern we're going to be using. So you need to have some open discussions. You need to be able to have the new guy that you just hired, fresh out of code camps or fresh out of the alt.NET community say, hey, whoa. Mr. 10, go to 20. We got to have a talk here. We need to talk about some patterns that I think will help us yield more testable code, more maintainable code. So you do need to make some decisions up front, but you don't need to take a whole sprint to do those decisions. Okay, tech ed, learning that you can find online can help you understand what these different patterns and practices are. I'll talk a little bit about them in a minute. You're probably thinking this is impossible. Impossible. Blasphemy you speak. It's not impossible, but it's not easy either. So here's one of my favorite FAQs. Ken Schwaber was asked, do you have to be smart to be agile or to do Scrum? Answer, no, but you have to be smart to develop software. And that's really what it comes down to here. Agile is just forcing you to be transparent, forcing you to share the risk with the rest of the team, forcing you to be, if you make a bad decision, you all know about it, you collectively own it, and you collectively move on, rather than let's hide behind this mountain of documentation. Well, we're building it this way because that's what the requirements asked us to do. The requirements are a nice inanimate object that you can blame, whereas being on an agile team, there is really no blame. You should collectively share the success or the failure of it. So it's all about business and value and priority. You really need to let the customer value and prioritize the what, but not the how. The architecture, infrastructure decisions, they tend to serve the team. I would say they almost become the non-functional requirements or the acceptance criteria on some of these product backlog items. By the way, I just hate the term non-functional requirement. I really force myself to say quality attribute or quality of service requirement. Just thinking I'm requiring you not to function just doesn't make any sense. So if you are putting things in there like it's got to have 3 nines of availability, it's got to be able to scale to 1,000 people using the app rather than 10 right now. Put those down as conditions of acceptance or part of your definition of done if they're going to apply to everything, and make sure that the team owns those things. Let the team decide what's fit for purpose. Have you heard the term before, fit for purpose? It's important in software because a lot of us like to geek out and build gold-plated, awesome software when really we just needed a screen and a button. So in an example, we've got a product owner, a customer that says, hey, I would sure like this requirement. And rather than whiteboard it out and wireframe it and just go through all the analysis and the functional specifications and the system specifications and the system definition manual and the data flow diagrams and all the activity diagrams, let's just put down title, description, and acceptance criteria. That's the agile way. Okay, so title, all cars must stop at one Microsoft way. And in my opinion, that's enough right there, title only, to put it in the backlog and keep track of it. It's a desirement. We don't know really what its purpose is, but somebody put it in the backlog. We can later accept that. We can later further describe it and then end up giving it a business value and a priority. But if you know ahead of time, or as you know, as it emerges, go ahead and put the user story in there, which is just a description. So as the intersection safety officer, so as the persona, I want all cars approaching one Microsoft way, I want, to stop so that no geeks, pedestrians get injured. If you've ever been at Microsoft, it's a bit of a video game up there at times. You got the large groups of people going back and forth to the company store and building the building, and then of course people are driving their Ferraris up there and not really yielding to traffic. So we got to come up with something that saves lives here. As a, I want, so that. And the so that part, the last part, is really important because it kind of gives a bit of business value to the problem. Otherwise, you just say, hey, we need something that will tell people to stop. Why? So no pedestrians get injured. We'll say that. That way someone looking at this, not so hip on TFS or not so hip on Scrum, can just see in that one sentence what the value is. So how many of you write user stories that way? Awesome, hand went right up. It's simple, one sentence, easy format to follow. Now, before the team should consider sizing this or consider committing to do it, what does acceptance look like? What does success look like? And acceptance criteria can just simply be bullets, or you might need to put in some other artifacts. Well, we need to have it look like this. It's got to look like the rest of the application. See screenshot attached, something like that. But in this case, 3 things. The solution should be universally understood. So whatever you come up with should be universally understood by all people coming up to Microsoft Way. Question?
How measurable do those criteria need to be? These aren't super specific, like low TCO. I can't measure that. How do you know
That's a good question.
met the criteria?
So the question is how should these metrics be evaluated? They should be testable. So you can't really have a low TCO the way it's written. So someone should say, so that each year we spend less than $10,000 maintaining it, or something like that would be a better acceptance criteria. Good point. Should be available 24/7 and should have a low total cost of ownership. Now, this is where a lot of customers or users or product owners would like to get involved with the solution. But what you need to do is, as the team of developers, is say, we got it from here, okay? And then the team kicks around the ideas. Well, we got a stop sign. We got a guy with a whistle. We got a light. We got a brick wall. We got a checkpoint with guys with Kevlar helmets and guns. And you think about them, let the team decide the how. Well, let's see, universally understood. Maybe all of those, yeah. We've got cable news on all the time. We know what all those things are. But I don't know if somebody in a country that doesn't have electricity might know what that middle one was. And the guy with the whistle might think he's a referee or something. So we got to make sure that those are fit for purpose. Available 24/7. Low cost of ownership. I'm thinking the sign at this point. You see how it works? Where you're in trouble is where the product owner says, I need this capability, for this user story. Here are the criteria, and I'd like you to do it using Flash. You guys ever get that? And maybe the Flash is a real reason. So if it's a compatibility reason, or we've already got our users that know Flash, that should go into our definition of done. All things we develop that are web-facing should be written in Flash because our users know how to use it, or it should at least be in the acceptance criteria. But to me, that's a smell of a dysfunction that says your product owner is telling you the how. They should stick to the what.
The middle one can flash. I don't know.
The middle one can Flash? Okay. I like that. So I kind of said this already, but specifying acceptance criteria is something that's done incrementally. Initially, your story, your product backlog item can just have a title. Later, more detailed description. Later, more detailed acceptance criteria. I would say at number 3 there, it's probably a good point to bring the team in to maybe estimate it, size it, understand the complexity and the effort, using planning poker, story points, something like that. Not until the team then says, okay, we're going to commit to building that, should you then go to 4, 5, and 6, which is starting to link them up to test cases with more detailed criteria, even manual steps. You know, step 1, grab somebody from a country in sub-Saharan Africa. Step 2, ask them if they know what this means. Step 3, record result, you know, whatever your test is to verify it's fit for purpose. And then if you're using an awesome tool like Visual Studio, you can take those manual tests, record them, and play them back as automated tests, and you know, remove or reduce the human factor to some degree. Let's go into our release plan here, and let's talk about the tailspin world that we live in. So I've got Visual Studio up and running here, Team Foundation Server, and I've got the Tailspin Team Project. I've got some work items in here already, so I've got a bit of a product backlog already in here. And I've got some areas set up, so we got a bug to fix. We've got some product backlog items. You know, we'd like a customer login screen and store locations. And, you know, this is just really the wrong UI for this. So let me just pop into Team Web Access here. And first of all, this is just a web-based version of Team Explorer, so to speak. So you can look at your work items, and you can, you know, get and look at source code, and you can see your builds. But I've got Urban Turtle installed, and Urban Turtle is a Microsoft partner, a vCIP partner that actually builds an agile planning and an agile task board that just sits right in here with the web access. So if you're using TFS, this is a great way for you to come in here and see your product backlog, you know, whether it's PBIs and bugs, or maybe your project is using one of these other templates here, MSF Agile or MSF, you know, the French version or the English version, or Scrum for Team System. And it also works with custom ones as well. But it lets you see your board here in a little better interface. For one thing, you can actually prioritize this. If I'm the product owner, I can say, well, you know, we really need to get a Salesforce going here, so we need the careers thing done maybe before that. And gosh, you know, this customer login is kind of important too. And I'm looking at the business value and the effort, and I'm coming up with my priorities here. Initially, my priorities are just hosed, but if I drag and drop in there, you can see it's using some advanced Stephen Hawking math there to put the priorities in a way that there's not going to be a lot of overlap there. And the thinking is you should never really see the priority numbers anyway. You should just work with them the way they are. But then along comes a new requirement. Hey, you know, this careers thing, we really need to maybe rewrite that. So let me just edit this guy. It's kind of limited in the way it's explained. We need to increase our workforce. Oops. And this might be what you'd see in a typical backlog. You'd see something that's very obscure like that one of the stakeholders snuck in, or the business analyst. So then part of Scrum, part of any agile process is treating this backlog, you know, like it's gospel, making sure you understand what's coming up, helping the product owner understand the trade-offs, the cost of things. So periodically, you know, 5 to 10% of your sprint length should be spent grooming this backlog. So you guys meet in, you know, the product owner's office every Tuesday afternoon, and you're looking at this, increase our workforce. You know, what is that? It's number one. It's obviously, you know, a high value thing for you. What are we talking about here? Well, first of all, let's go ahead and accept that. So it's gone from new to approved status. And in fact, let's go in here and look at this. And there's actually nothing in here except for, as a site visitor, I want to know what job openings Tailspin Toys has currently open so that I might be able to join the team. And the way this is written is, as the owner of Tailspin Toys, we need to increase our workforce so that we can make more money. Something even more generic than that. Now, that's probably too big of an effort to do in one sprint. So there's this concept of an epic. If the product backlog item is too big to do in one sprint, you need to break it down. So the thinking is, well, we don't want to go and try to, empty that whole swamp at once. So let's come in here and create maybe 3 child product backlog items, little smaller ones here. And I'll just rip these out real quick. So this one would be more of a, see job postings. And I'll just bang this in real quick. As a site visitor, actually I think I might have it in the clipboard. Boom, there we go, awesome. And I put my acceptance criteria in, updated within 1 hour of HR posting the job, have available to anonymous visitors to the site. Postings are downloadable as PDF files, PDB files, but that'd be really weird. Save and close. And you'll see now kind of the epic is breaking down into these other children here. And let me do a couple more here real quick. So another one we need to is be able to upload resumes for consideration. So as a job seeker, I want to be able to, same thing, upload my resume to be considered for a job. Acceptance criteria. Come up with some good ones, put them on the right there. And then one more, and then we'll be done with this exercise. So we want notified job seekers. So as a hiring manager at Tailspin, I want to notify job seekers of open positions so that we may hire good folks. Acceptance criteria, save it. And then of course we're going to approve all 3 of these. And now we can work on these kind of one at a time. So what we can do is say, all right, this is our new high priority one here. So we can move it to the top. It is at the top, all right. Then we can drag it down into sprint 1 here. So it's just, lots of things have just happened real quickly here. We've had a sprint planning meeting, the team got together, we went through the risks and the acceptance criteria and said, yeah, we commit to building that. So let's drag it in here and let's go ahead and start working on it. All right, so we'll come back to that. And really all release planning is just the continuing effort to keep that backlog in good shape. So you know what the items are, what their priority are, and kind of know, hey, if we're releasing by date, so July 1st, we kind of know, given our velocity and given how the estimates look for the stories coming up, what we can expect to be kind of our cut line for going into that release. If you release by feature, you can do it a different way. You can say, given our velocity, and it's sometimes more accurate than other times, separate discussion, we can kind of say that these 7 features here, these 7 PBIs, probably will be done by the middle of April. So it'll give you a bit of a predictability either way, but in no way is it an exact science. So in Agile, in Scrum, there is a rule that says every sprint generates an increment of potentially shippable business value. Have you heard this one before? Business value every sprint. So guess what that means? It's not okay to have an architecture sprint. It's not okay to have an infrastructure sprint. There's no such thing as sprint 0. And while we're at it, there's no such thing as done. This is one of my pet peeves. You're either done or not. You're not done and then potentially done. Question? Is there business value in doing that? So if it has to be done, do it as get those people to be doing the tasks during the sprints along with the development, and get those people into the team and commit to the work. but don't do that up front. Do it in parallel, or do it at the end when it's no longer a development issue. I knew I was going to get questions on this slide. Pink shirt.
If there is no architecture sprint, where would you do your initial high-level architecture? Just to get
During sprint 1. You're sitting closer than I am. If you don't have an architecture sprint, when do you do your high-level architecture? Was the question. And I said, well, because there's no business value in doing architecture, you need to do that in sprint 1. Remember, this is not easy to do. Other question? In front of you? No? That it? All right. So then how do we do it? Well, the team performs design as part of the sprint to provide a solid basis to support the goal. Some sprints, like sprint 1, will be more design heavy than others, but you cannot get away from delivering business value. So you're going to have to look at it, and they're saying, well, I need these giant, 13-point, 8-point, 20-point stories done first. You say, you know what, product owner, we can't do that. Sprint 1 is going to be where we're making some really big decisions on our patterns we're using, on our frameworks. This notion of having to go and provision a whole data center environment to start doing development, that's crap. You can start developing and delivering increments of business value on laptops. You can stand up computers for doing testing, that maybe don't have the horsepower you need. That stuff will emerge too. So you might have to do a 1-point problem. Say, Mr. Product Owner, we can't commit to anything until down about 13 in the list, which is we need to have a help about screen that shows the version of the application that's running. What? There's no business value in that. Well, according to you, there's 3 points. So that might be what we need to give you in sprint 1. So it's a negotiation, it's a collaboration. Another question?
How future-looking should that sprint 1 design be?
The question is, how future-looking should sprint 1 be?
Should it be only the design to make sprint 1 business value, or is it actually looking further?
Oh, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that question. So the question is, how much design do you put into sprint 1? Ideally, you do just enough architecture to deliver sprint 1's business value. Okay? Hard sounds hard, doesn't it? Oops. You need to make smart decisions. So I knew this was coming. So you don't want to do anything in sprint 1 that's going to paint you into a corner. So you want to make sure you're using open and popular frameworks, open and popular principles and patterns, and make sure that whatever you're selecting is maintainable and testable. Okay. I know that you guys come to Tech Ed and you sit through talks on the popular entity frameworks, the popular MVCs. You hear people talk about test-driven development and test-first development, and maybe you just discount it. But that stuff works. You'll end up with a testing harness and regression tests that then you can refactor some of your design as you go forward, and you can see what breaks. We're going to talk about that. So yeah, you don't want to gold plate. You want to build just enough architecture to support that sprint 1. And you don't want to over-architect it either. That's the problem we all face, is we love to design things. We love to look at the whole problem and say, well, I know what's coming. I know we're going to need that other table, another restored procedure. And we're going to need these other methods, so I'm going to go ahead and stub them out now. Heck, I'll go ahead and write it, because I got some link to SQL code right here in front of me. So always remember that bottom bullet. Solve today's problem today, tomorrow's problem tomorrow. But do it in a smart way. Also, you want to minimize documentation. Remember my first slide was working software over documentation? So documentation has value. If you need to do some use case diagrams to explain to the business people what you're thinking, if you need to have some data flow diagrams or some activity diagrams to explain to their team members what you're thinking and collaborate on a solution, go for it. I prefer whiteboards over electronic media because they can be erased and forgotten. As soon as you do something in a media that you can save, Visio diagram, PowerPoint, Balsamic, stuff that's coming in Dev 11, man, you're going to own it, and you're going to want to keep it up to date. You're going to become a slave to it. So use them for what they're for, which is to foster communication between you and the customer or within the team, but try to opt for things that just get the point across, and then you can discard. I've seen this one come back to bite people. Ultimately, it's the team's decision if they want to use models and when. But burn them at the earliest responsible time. Okay, I'm going to call BS on that one. I think we need to have our documentation. What about the new guy? We hire the new person on the team. How are we going to get them up to speed? Do you know what Agile's answer to that is? Pair programming. Sit over here. We're in Sprint 4. Mark here is really good at, doing the stuff that we hired you to do. As you're watching Mark work, you can catch some things he's doing. He can teach you about our structure and how we're building this app. And you don't need to have some giant orientation document. Nobody has those anyway. See, this is your out. But you do need business value in the document. If there is business value in the documentation, then you need to keep your documentation. So the product owner says, we shall have an API document that explains to people how to use our class library that we're selling on the internet. Okay, probably want to have that as a first-class citizen. But notice what happened here. The product owner said there's business value in that. So you want to then make a point of keeping it, making it according to the acceptance criteria. Also, if the documentation can be auto-generated, so hey, given the code, let's generate a class diagram, sequence diagram from our method, using layer diagrams for validation, things like that. Awesome, because you're not really maintaining documentation. The tool is, but just anything that's got, gosh, this pretty picture here. It's so old. Let me just spend a half a day and kind of true it up to the way the model is right now. Don't do that. Don't get caught in that trap. So Microsoft has these things called layer diagrams. And layer diagrams are more than just pretty pictures with boxes. They actually allow you to say, these classes or these namespaces or these DLLs sit in these different layers. And then you can set up rules about which can call into which. So if I have a layer diagram for an MVC application, for example, I can say that the controller can talk to this, but this can't talk back to the controller. So it watches your code. You want to set these things up. You want to have the validation in there. You can set it up so that it automatically happens during build, automatically happens during team build. And then it will tell the team, hey, the build failed because you broke one of the rules in the layer diagrams. I'm going to show you this in just a minute. All right. So we've got this notified job seekers here. And we're going to pull this up. All right, so we've maybe want to pull that over into our task board. And if we were doing proper Scrum here or Agile, we could actually pull this up and start commit to it, and then we could create our tasks from it. So we could start creating tasks. Hopefully not any bugs. If you're creating bugs before you've created any tasks, that's a bad thing. But let me come back over here. I've actually got the Tailspin Toys solution already open. And it's a big one. You can get this from Microsoft. It's nice because it has lots of opportunities for improvement. So it's not a polished app. There are unit tests that are failing. There are links on the page and the site that aren't working. But at a high level, it looks like this. I think you've probably seen it a couple times this week. I've seen a couple other presenters showing it off. All right, so it's a fictitious company that sells models and model airplanes, and you can come in here and add them to the cart. And it uses the Microsoft MVC for ASP.NET. So if you've been using that, this will make a lot of sense to you. And I also think that happens to be a good pattern to follow. A lot of support from Microsoft, tooling in Studio, a lot of videos out there to help people get started, and a testable architecture too. We're going to talk more about that. But what I want to do here is a couple things. One is show you some of the models that are in here. So we do have Visual Studio Ultimate installed, and it does have support for various UML models. So you've got your use case diagrams, and you can create these and use them within the team for the purpose necessary. To say, hey, product owner, can you have a look at this, or can you get us in touch with a subject matter expert to see if this is what you're envisioning for what the shopper can do with the system? And who can't understand stick figures and arrows and bubbles? That's the great thing about use cases. You've got class diagrams here, which get a little more geeky. And these guys can be used to generate code if you have the right productivity tools installed. There's activity diagrams, component diagrams for the big picture. And again, I'm a fan of using these as necessary, tossing them. Of course, once you're in TFS, you can never toss anything. You can just hide it or label it or roll it back or merge it. But there's actually a layer diagram here which I want to spend some time on. This layer diagram says, and don't worry about the colors. This is just the way the colors were out of the box. We've got these different layers here, the infrastructure layer, the model, the repository. And then you can use this layer explorer over here to say, hey, given this layer of controllers, here are the classes and the identifiers and where it's at that actually live in that layer. And you just do this by dragging and dropping from a number of different sources. You can drag from the Architecture Explorer window. And then you just set up these rules. So hey, now this class here, in this controller, it can call into MVC, but the MVC things, which are these classes here, can't call back. If you wanted to set up that rule, you could make this guy a double-headed arrow, so bidirectional communication. Or the toolbox, you can drag out new layers and whatnot. If you go and get the architecture power tools, then you can actually get some additional layer diagrams in here. You can actually drag out, MVC patterns and have it do a lot of work for you ahead of time. I just didn't install that here. But then when you're all done, you can right-click and you can say, I want to validate this architecture. So you can do it manually, just kind of here, ad hoc. And I did set this up to fail. All right, so I got 6 errors here, and you can see here that there's an invalid dependency. So system.web MVC controller extensions, authorized credit card method is trying to call tailspin.web.tailspin controller. So essentially, these 3 guys here need to be double-headed arrows for this to work. And you can set those up, or you can make the rules as tough as you want. You can tell these this layer diagram, hey, your build action is to validate. So whenever somebody does a build, either here or with team build, it'll actually validate and set this thing to fail the build if it has any violations. Nothing like a failed build to tell the team, hey, you broke something, and then you get in there and look. And unfortunately, this is maybe not as meaningful as it could be. But AV0001 invalid dependency, then you have to start looking at the namespaces and the breakdown of the logical structure to see what it is that's calling in there. But you can set up these rules to not be violated. That's kind of nice. What I might do too, though, is in order to set this up for agile development, and there's going to be a database involved. Let me just add a database project here. So I'm just going to add a new project. This is a SQL Server 2008 database project. We're just going to call it, I don't know, for lack of a better name, tailspin.database. This is a feature that's in the Premium Edition, and it allows you to wrap all of your SQL development into a project and actually manage the changes to the schema, manages the changes to deploying it to different servers. And have any of you played with this? This is the Data Dude stuff from a couple of you. Every time I show this, I get a few people that have never seen it before, so I like to always push this. So let me go ahead and import the schema from the existing database, because we're about to make some changes to it. And finish. And I can play in the Solution Explorer here. I can go to the Schema View window, but I'm going to go into my DBO schemas here, and here are my different tables. So I can look at my tables that are behind the scenes for this MVC app. And if I wanted to create a new one later, I could just say right-click, Add Table. And this is what I like, is it's all. So if I wanted to create a table here called jobs, I can get in here and just start ripping create statements. What it doesn't have, but what maybe you saw in the keynote, some of the stuff coming with Juno is more of a designer experience here with drop-downs, and I forget what the types are in SQL, and let me pick, int and varchar and all of that. So more of what you'd expect to see in SQL Management Studio. But you want to do this because this way all of your artifacts from the web app, from the components, and also the database get checked into TFS, labeled accordingly. You're assigning things to tasks. You're doing that traceability. And if you leave the database work to the SSMS, to the database administrator who's not on the team, that's another recipe there that you don't want to fight that one. So in order to make the time box here, we're going to do sprint 1 as a couple of screenshots here. So at a high level, what are we doing in sprint 1? Well, we're going to create a dbo.jobs table. use a database project so you can manage the change associated to work items. And then since we're using an MVC application, we need to make the model for that. So we need to have some class definition that maps back to that job public class that we're creating. And I would recommend using Link to SQL or Entity Framework to assist you in that. Drag drop from Server Explorer and then let it generate the class definition for you. And now here's the hard part. And I know what that jobs table needs. And I know what methods I'm going to need to implement that. I need to be able to save a job and update a job and make a job live for 90 more days, and refresh it. And I need to be able to have subscriptions. I need to be able to have people, say it's filled or not. No, stop doing that. That's waste. Unless it's what's necessary for fit for purpose for your Sprint 1 commitments. All we need at this point is a simple jobs table, jobs model, and really we just need down here the ability to get the list of jobs and then probably to get an individual job to drill down and get that. That's it. Don't over-architect it. We also need, for the MVC app, we need a careers action and a view so that we can, launch that off the home page and create an add view dialog to help us build a more interesting page. Use the HTML helpers to bring in and generate content like a grid or some kind of a clickable list. And then that can then go into the, drilling in and looking at a specific job. This is what I'm talking about, using a framework that's out there, that's mature. I'm not saying MVC is what you want to use. Do your own research, but just make sure that the criteria you're looking at, maintainable, testable, you can hire people that know it. The new guy can sit down and go, oh, this is MVC. Cool, I went to a tech ed 2 years ago. I know how this works. When you're using something like some framework that some wacko from Idaho wrote, it may be the most awesome Fox Pro app ever. You're not going to find anybody that's really going to support it. Nothing against Fox Pro. Oh, don't forget other tasks. Write and run your acceptance tests. I'm a big fan of unit testing as you're writing your methods for the repository. But don't forget your UI tests, your acceptance tests, so that we know, that we're done, that this thing did show them in a list, and that we can save this as a PDF, and all those things are actually verifiable through a passing test. Okay. Complete all work to definition of done. If you've been to my other talks this week, I'm a big fan of definition of done. If your team owns a definition of done that says, it was pair programmed, all code was written using TDD, everything was checked in, all acceptance criteria was met, code reviewed, labeled, branched, whatever, an MSI was built according to, our definition of done, then do it. Don't be flaccid and don't just get that half done, but it's good enough for the product owner to use. So if you don't do everything according to your definition of done, you're going to get that technical debt snowballing, and eventually you'll have so much undone work that you can't even catch up. So done with Sprint 1. So how do we make this more effective? Well, again, smart decisions. Use principles, patterns, and practices accordingly. Refactor early and often. Plan on a fair amount of time refactoring. We'll talk about refactoring the Martin Fowler definition versus refactoring, I like Microsoft's definition a little better, and then of course all the tooling that's available out there for it. Write your tests early, run them often. You'll know right away if you're failing something. And then use some ALM tools so that you can know and roll back and trace this stuff through. So this is my appetizer platter. I spend a fair amount of time just dealing with development practices. And I boiled this down to my 15 favorite, the grid there at the bottom. But let's start at the top. Principles. Coupling, cohesion, composition, encapsulation, the OO stuff. If you're going to do OO, and if you're writing in .NET, you're going to do OO, then make sure you do it right. Okay? Make sure that you inherit correctly. Make sure that you do polymorphism correctly. And by sticking to MVC, and sticking to the way that it's done according to the guides and according to the experts, you're not going to get yourself out of whack on the principles. Patterns. There's a lot of patterns out there. The Gang of Four guys, their stuff lives on. It's maybe looks a little different now, and its implementation is a little different than what they envisioned. But the Microsoft patterns and practices, they got a whole website. There's a whole team of people that all they do is work on this. And then the practices, so behavior-driven development. That's a good way to know that you're done. Acceptance test-driven development. Domain-driven design. Don't repeat yourself. Defensive programming. I like this one, the principle of least privilege. It's probably one of the easiest ones to explain and one of the hardest ones to do. Basically, it means don't log in as local administrator and write your application. Log in as Joe user as though they'd be using your app. So when you're running it and it's actually hitting, I can't write to that drive, I can't read the registry, I can't access that resource. Those are real world things you're going to run into. So start with the minimum permission necessary and then add on what's needed to get the job done rather than just assume local admin and then it's impossible to know what to take away. Question?
You can also add the principle, who's the hardware you will find later, because as a developer you have to do 4 cores,
Yes.
gigahertz machines, and later in the game you...
So to rephrase this man saying we should all be programming on Pentium like 2s again, just to make sure we feel the experience, the pain of the user, right? I'm not going to put that on the slide, but I took a note. My absolute favorite one, Yagni. You ain't going to need it. So many times we just want a gold plate and make this just the Uber architecture, and you're not going to need it. Just stick to what's required for Sprint 1. Refactoring. Well, it's a technique for restructuring an existing body of code, altering its internal structure without changing its external behavior. Long live Martin Fowler. I like Microsoft's definition. Changing your code without breaking your tests. Easy. Okay? Now, that's not exactly the same thing because sometimes you change your code by changing the signature of the method or reordering the parameters or renaming the method. But good tools from Microsoft, from ReSharper, from DevExpress, can actually search your code, your loaded solution, and find everything that calls it and make that change. So you're not going to break your tests. Martin Fowler might get uncomfortable. Well, that's not refactoring because you renamed the method. Well, yeah, but I did it in a way that it didn't impact anything, so the net effect is the same. I spend way too much time thinking about this stuff. I'm sorry. So you should refactor little and often as the unit as well as architecture level. So not just the individual methods, but rethinking, gosh, we might need to split this into 2 classes. Gosh, this class might need to be into its own class library, its own component. You want to do everything with tests around it. I'm a big fan of continuous integration, CI. If you're going to build yourself a CI environment, make it the fastest hardware possible. Get yourself a nice, fast build server, solid-state drives. I'm telling you, you won't regret it. Because as you check in and this thing takes a minute to build and another 5 minutes to run the test, you do that a lot, you're going to wish you weren't using CI, you're going to turn it off. So we're some of the most, resourceful people out there, developers. And if you make it slow for me, I'm going to find another way. So don't make it slow for the developers because they'll revolt. One option is to use test impact analysis. So there's a feature that was in 2010 that says, hey, you've got 16,000 unit tests, which is the record of one of my clients. I won't say who it is, but that's awesome. They certainly do not want to run all 16,000 unit tests every check-in. So they will use test lists or test categories. But there's a feature in Visual Studio that just says, hey, test impact, take a baseline, run all the tests. Here's the SDF file, the little SQL Server compact edition file. And now whenever you do a build, you can compare to that and see the methods that changed and then just recommend the 10 or 15 or 20 or so unit tests that should be run. You guys run this? Test impact analysis, heard of it? Used it? Wow, 2 people. It literally is that cool. So do a build of all your 16,000 unit tests, and then it says, okay, these 37 should be run. The problem is out of the box, Team Foundation Build doesn't support that. But a buddy of mine, and I'm just going to go ahead and go off script here and look up his blog. I should be careful. Let's see here. And it's a definition of done. He's in New Zealand. This is how I do searches. His name's Rob, and it's Team Build. And let's see if we get close. Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Definition of done, Rob. Test impact analysis. That's what we'll do. Home, delete, and team build. No, I give up. There's geeks with blogs there, but team build. Rob Mayer. That's his name. Hey, there it is. When in doubt, Martin Woodward blogs about it and points back to it. All right. So he came up with this, just a couple months ago, right before the MVP Summit, or right during the MVP Summit, I can't remember, and did this blog. But it basically puts the XAML file here and how to do this. So if you're using Team Build, which supports continuous integration greatly, you can then tell it, hey, after you do your build of the changed files that I just checked in, go and only run the impacted tests. This will also help cut down the cycle of continuous integration and continuous quality checks as you're doing your team-based development. So definition of done. I knew that was his blog name. Come up and get my card afterwards, and I can tell you how that works. ReSharper, Refactor, Visual Studio. You guys use any of these refactoring tools up here? Nice. So Visual Studio also has refactoring tools for database projects. So then I should also mention Redgate has refactoring tools for database projects, but about the same as Visual Studio. And they're actually we're showing some of those off. So ReSharper, how many ReSharper fans in the audience? A lot of hands go up, awesome. So there are a number of refactoring methods here in ReSharper, and some of these are really cool. I mean, adjust your namespaces and move string to resource. That's awesome. A lot of the basic ones. So convert method to property and promote this to a parameter and reorder your parameters. The same ones that are in Visual Studio. I was really blown away when I looked at DevExpress's Refactor Pro. Good heavens, it's like 160 or more refactoring methods here, and everything you could think of. Plus, there's a community of another 90 or so community-driven refactoring tools, and you can also build your own. Any DevExpress refactor people in here? It's about what I expected, maybe 3 or 4 people. Now, C-Sharp's got refactoring. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things you can do in C-Sharp. Database projects, although those are pretty cool, those 5 there. So if you're doing database work, I'll just focus on that for a second. You can certainly go in there and say, I need to rename this stored procedure, this table. Maybe you started off calling it the jobs table, and then you have this big meeting and said, you know what? We don't name our tables with S's at the end. How dare you? Refactor, rename, everything that calls it gets refactored as well. Same with you want to fully expand the wildcards. We did a select star in our stored procedure function. Shame on us. Well, you can fully qualify the names and turn the star into all the columns. Or you can put EBO dot, whatever your schema is, and fully expand them out to 2-part or 3-part names. And you want to be using ALM. Okay, that's another thing you've got to be using for team development, so that you've got the ability to source control, manage the changes to your code, database scripts, everything, in case you want to roll back, or in case you want to label it and push out a build according to at this point in time, Sprint 2 has been accepted, and we've got a Sprint 2 label on our source tree. But it's more than that. It's the stuff I was showing you earlier with the work items and the product backlog and being able to map those to tasks. So you want a good, strong engineering platform, and Visual Studio plus TFS is that. This week you've seen a lot of demonstrations and talks about how it's not just for the developers and testers, stakeholders, the chickens in the Scrum game of Scrum. The chickens now can have a look at the backlogs and have a say in what goes in there perhaps. Strong CI tools, refactoring tools, and you get all of these things, and you really do need that as a team. So in Sprint 2 here, we might want to go back and do a few more things. So our Sprint 2 priority is to now, we've delivered that first sprint, okay? So we've got the ability to look up jobs, and now we want to be able to submit resumes. I'm not going to go and show you the prioritization of that and closing it down. But same thing, the resumes story that we're working on, use a database project, use a tool to help us generate the model, add the methods. So if we're just going to be submitting resumes, remember the requirement didn't call for let me update my resume or let me look up other people's resumes. Just let me submit so it can get to HR so they can start seeing those in the back end and making some decisions. So just add the essential interface methods, do that with unit tests, enable the appropriate action and view if necessary, or maybe you can hitchhike on the existing careers screen that you're already building. and then make it interesting. Give it some buttons and some style there, so people know. Here's where I type in the name of the file, and here's where I hit upload, and don't gold plate it. And again, acceptance testing. Just continuation, definition of done. Make sure you're always finished with that. It's a cadence you get into. If you're not doing this iterative, sprint kind of development, it's not easy at first. And you might blow a sprint. You might say, okay, we're going to do what Hundhausen suggested. Sprint 1, we're going to try to not sit down and do all architecture, and then you sit down and you do all architecture. It's like, oh, well, no business value, but that happens. Don't make it the norm. Don't make it the plan. Try for business value every sprint. And how do you know you're getting business value? That's meeting with the product owner. Hey, product owner, you told me this thing was 10 points of business value. Well, we're not quite to the end of the sprint yet, but we're pretty close to showing you something. Can you come by and look at this? Be surprised how many development teams don't get that casual, hey, can you come over and look at this? They want to wait until it's all done and then show it at the sprint review, or they're just afraid of the big evil product owner or something, I don't know. But get that collaboration happening early, get them looking at it, and you might say, yeah, that looks good. I don't even think we need the other thing we talked about. That let's take that off the conditions of acceptance, and let's move on to some more work here. So don't always assume there's going to be feature creep against you. There could be feature creep away from you and giving you some more flexibility to do some other things. So done, and guess what? At Sprint 2's review, it's decided the company does not need the last feature, so ship it. And this is where big design up front fails and where Agile works. The way you built Sprint 1 and Sprint 2's increment, they're happy with it. We don't need that ability to be notified because, we realize that the things coming into HR, those documents, they're able to just handle it through Outlook. We didn't need to build that into the software, so we thought it was a requirement and it wasn't. It's okay to change your mind the other way occasionally and take away work that we thought we were going to do. Don't you agree? Does this ever happen? No. Tug on it. How do you know when you're done? Well, you just have a list, an audible list. Definition of done is a checklist owned by the team. You can throw it on a document on the portal. You can throw it on a wiki page. If you're using TFS, that link there will take you to a cool work item control that another MVP in Germany built. It actually is right there in TFS, and it's a checkbox list driven off of an XML document that's behind the work item, and you can put in there all of your items. A real simple definition, coded, acceptance criteria met. It's been passed, the test pass, and checked in. But definitions of done are a lot more detailed than this usually. Coded in pairs, coded TDD. All new code has unit tests, code coverage at X%. But I tell people start simple and ratchet up. Don't put an enormous amount of pressure on your definition of done because you're not going to do it. Start with something that's achievable. Go for a few sprints. In the retrospective, say how are we doing according to our definition of done? Man, that code coverage is killing us. We thought that 40% was going to be a low number, but all the code that gets generated from that tool that we bought from Lower Upper Slovovia, that's according to our definition, we've got to write tests for the code it generates. And you say, well, do we? No, I met the guy that wrote that tool. He's a rock star. Let's put in there unit test 40% for code that we write. So you might want to ratchet your definition of done in the appropriate direction during your retrospectives too. So here you go. What about the complete rewrite? How many of you have been in this situation? You've got the product owner there. I would say it's the product owner that's not involved and says, hey, that big large legacy app that we've got? I know it's written in Fortran, COBOL, FoxPro, whatever. We need you to rewrite it in this .NET thing. Okay, because we need to bring it to modern technology. You're like, awesome, it's about time. I've got some great ideas on how to, and before you can finish, they say, you know what? I'm not even going to create a backlog or prioritize it or talk about the features. Just make sure the new one does everything the old one does. Anybody? You want the product backlog? It's running over on, Chuck's desk. There's the product backlog. And that's crap. That there's screens and buttons and reports that no one's ever used. So why should you spend the time to do that? So what's the appropriate response here as a mature team to Mr. Product Owner here? What's the budget? In this economy, that's a great question. I mean, a mature team should be able to run, say, hey, if you don't have the courtesy, the respect for us to give us a prioritized backlog, we don't have the courtesy and respect for you to build it. I know that's hard to say, it's hard to do, but you're going on a path here that you're not going to be able to win. There's no success on this one. You're gonna build this thing. Worst case, the team then figures out the priority. All right, well, we'll break it down into 500 user stories. We think we can't even get half the screens to come up anymore, and we'll prioritize it based on some casual interviews with the users. That might work, but you got to have a product owner. The product owner's got to take responsibility and share in that risk. If possible, run away from this. Be transparent. As you're going through your agile architecture, as you're building this architecture up, you might really, really screw up, and you might, have picked a practice or picked a pattern that doesn't work. Wow, there's a story that came up in Sprint 7 that MVC will not support. So meet with the product owner right away. We thought it would work, but it's not going to. We thought it was going to be an 8-point problem. We thought we could do it and something else in this sprint, but we can't. So if there's going to be a problem, let the product owner know right away. Product owner's not, evil with torture devices, hopefully. They should be able to collaborate and say, well, what can you do? What can the MVC, framework do for us in this regard? You say, well, we could do this, but the button won't spin with baloney dancing on it like you want. It's just going to be a regular button that changes colors, and they might say, that's fine. That's fit for purpose. That criteria that you're talking about was a bit of a stretch goal. So collaborate. Let people see your backlogs, product and sprint. Let people see your burn downs. Let people know how you're doing. Don't let people suck you into the conversation of, what were your actual hours? Right? Why did your estimates suck so bad? You know what my answer is to that one? Because what we do is very hard. That's all you have to say. Well, you said this is going to be 8 hours, and I'm seeing 18 hours. What happened? What we do is very hard. You just get a T-shirt and just point to it. Let people see the bugs. If there's bugs in the app, let people see it. Let people know that clicking that button is going to fail right now. Unless it's some kind of critical, crypto layer problem that you don't want people to know about. But adapt to these inspections. As people see this and give you feedback, make adaptation. All right, another quiz here. And some of you guys have seen this from my pre-conference. But as a team, with the definition of done, one of our items there is no code analysis, no FX cops, warnings, or errors. So we're right there. We're at sprint review. The sprint's essentially over. We're showing the product owner. The product owner's been seeing this for the last few days, very excited, invited all the board of directors in the back of the room. Can't wait for this job and resume thing to be working. And all of a sudden, the CA2210 pops up. And the product owner doesn't know what this is, doesn't care. But according to the team's definition of done, you're not done. This is a tough one here. How many of you would just close that window down and ship it? Okay. There could be, long tail effects to that. It could be that without the strong name, you can't put this thing in the GAC like you have the marketing and, instructions and training videos. So you might be affecting a lot of things there. How many of you would, hey, quick, go talk to the product owner and ask him about his golf handicap while I do something up here real quick. Strong name added in there, build, test break. Oh, crap. Maybe it's a quick fix, probably not. This whole, I'm going to ship today and, have the champagne ready for me at 5 when I get home. You call it midnight, well, I'm not home yet, honey, sorry. We haven't shipped yet, but it still is 5 o'clock, in Hawaii or whatever. So this is a maturity thing here. A mature team, the correct thing to do is to tell the product, I guess I'm done. We're not done according to our internal definition. I know you don't understand that, but we can't in good faith show this to you, and we certainly can't in good faith ship it. So, if you hold fast, then the sprint review is going to be very short, and that sprint retrospective that happens right after that is going to be very heated. Guy's going to take his glasses off and throw them across the desk. You know that move? What in the hell just happened? You embarrassed me in front of my board of directors. I've been seeing this thing the last few days. I wanted to show it to these guys. What happened? So you got to be prepared to take the heat on that. Or just ship it. All right, another pop quiz here. In Sprint 3, you're implementing the customer management component of the website. You've committed to delivering add, edit, and view functionality. That was what we're committing to in Sprint 3. But the product owner, the big scary guy here, you just know, you read his mind. In Sprint 4, he's going to want the ability to delete the customer. So as you're architecting Sprint 3's increment, do you go ahead and put the hooks in for that? Gosh, CRUD is so easy. That D just happens along with the CRU. Just do it. Don't need to. It's waste. Can you guarantee that's what you're doing in Sprint 4 is the delete thing? No, you can't. You know, this whole changing mind, feature creep, new priority one, you may never get to that. So anything you do there is waste, and it becomes inventory. Inventory is like store inventory. You got to carry around with you. Maybe you have tests for it. Awesome, that's better. But you're still carrying it around. So this kind of sums up my point today in this talk. Sorry, what was the question? It's a great question. If your framework's already giving you that stuff, then it is inventory, but I wouldn't say it's waste because you didn't waste any effort in designing it or building it. And if it's configurable later just to turn it on with the flip of a config file or hooking into an event or something, great, awesome. And those are the kind of frameworks you should be using. And then you can say, that's like an 8-point problem, Mr. Product Owner, to get that delete feature, and then, no, don't do that. Let me wrap up here and say that the Professional Scrum Developer Program, this is what we talk about. There's a program here, there's training, there's an assessment you can take and become certified through scrum.org. Ken Schwaber, Microsoft, and my company put this together. And it's 5 days of this kind of stuff. Hard discussions, working as a team, delivering increments according to definition of done. Follow us on Twitter, email me or follow me on Twitter, and come on up and have questions answered afterwards. Thank you very much.